Today is November 8th, 2017. I'm Adrienne Falaise, and it is my honor to be here with Jacques Pepin for the interviews on oral history of television. And we are at the Yale Club of New York City. Okay, so I'm going to move back over here.
A nice room.
It is. Okay. Thank you so much for sitting down with us today, Jacques.
Look at you or at
You can look right at me.
Yeah.
So we're just going to start with some background information. So the first question is, what was your name at birth?
I'm sorry.
Your name at birth, what your parents named you.
The name of the restaurant?
Your name,
oh,
when you were born.
Okay. Well, I am Jacques Pepin, and well, it goes from Jacques Pepin to Jacques Pepino, depending with
Pronunciation.
but something like that. Yes, right. And I live in Madison, Connecticut.
And where were you born, though?
I was born in Bourg-en-Bresse, which is a small town about 30, 40 miles from Lyon, which is the center of France. And it's very well known for the chicken. The chicken of Bresse, B-R-E-S-S-E, are very well-known chicken. So any restaurant there, you're going to have poulet à la crème, chicken and cream sauce, or in one way or the other.
And when were you born?
I was born in December 1935. Should have been born in 36 because I was born at 7 months old.
Oh, wow.
But yes. See my friend last night, Alain Seyac? Yeah, he was born in January 36. I was born in December 35, so he's a year younger. He was conceived a month before me, so according to the Chinese, he's older. They started conception, apparently.
Oh, wow. So what were your parents' names?
My mother, Jeanne Bourdet, her maiden name, and my father, Victor, Jean-Victor Pepin. So my father was a cabinet maker by trade, what we call an ébéniste in France, from the word ebony, that is fancy cabinet maker, like those Louis XV, 16, furniture only with kind of noble wood, like oak, cherry, apple, that type of things. And so was his father and his grandfather and his brother. But my mother was a cook. She had a little restaurant. And so for me, when I was a kid, I had kind of blinders, Either it was cabinet maker or restaurant. I don't even think I ever thought that I could be a doctor, a lawyer, or any of this. It was so far away from our family, so that we didn't even think about it. At that time, there was no television, there was no magazine, we didn't even have the telephone. So life was probably simpler for a young person to choose a way in life. But as I say, kind of a blinder on our eyes. It was going into the family business. Although my brother became an engineer, but my brother.
So did you start to gravitate towards cooking early on?
Not very early, around 6-year-old, something like that.
It's pretty early.
Yes. Yeah, my mother had a restaurant since I was about 5, 6, so we were in the kitchen helping my two brothers and I. I don't think we came back from school ever. I ever said I'm bored or anything like that. My father said, you're what? So was always washing the bottle too, or getting potato, or peeling one thing or another. In fact, before the restaurant she had in Lyon, at that point I was probably 8, 9. We used to go to the market in the morning before going to school, my two brothers and I, because the market was about maybe 8-10 blocks here of the restaurant, and she didn't have a car, of course, so she walked the market, which was along the Saône River, an open market. She walked the market one way, about a third of a mile maybe, and buy on her way back like 2 cases of tomato, because they were very ripe and they knew the guy couldn't keep it, tried to get it at a better price, get to the restaurant, getting back to the restaurant, and we carry the stuff, and she started peeling her vegetable for the lunch. It was a small restaurant. She didn't have a refrigeration. She had an ice box, that is a block of ice in a cabinet. So she had maybe 2 or 3 chicken for that day, a couple of fish, usually inexpensive fish like whiting or mackerel or whatever, and some beefsteak, so-called steak of out of the round. I mean, really tough. And she had to finish that by the end of the day because there was no refrigeration. And so she ran out of those things during the day, and the day after going back to the market. So everything was local, everything was organic. The word, you know, organic did not exist or whatever. I mean, but chemical fertilizer did not exist either, or insecticides, fungicides, and all of this. So it was, we kind of come around to that type of thing again a little bit, so there is a déjà vu happening in the kitchen.
Mm-hmm. Did you enjoy being in the kitchen and doing the shopping and all of that?
Yes, I always did, yes. I thought the kitchen was very exciting, a lot of noise. And yeah, that was a life that I liked, and I continued through my life to like it. And at some point I could have changed, do something else, but I came back to the kitchen. You know.
Now, World War II broke out when you were just 4 years old. So what was the war like for you?
Well, I didn't realize, you know, the war. I mean, as a kid, you don't realize what it is. I still remember my brother and I working behind the German soldier and imitating the goose step or whatever. They were yelled at us or whatever. So those were the Wehrmacht. It wasn't the Nazi, I guess, but yeah, and then my father left to go into the resistance, you know, in 42, I believe, something like that. Were created, probably because at that point, not that he wasn't a patriot, but I think at that time Hitler decided that he needed anyone, you know, above 14 or 15 years old to 50 to send to Germany to work in forced labor in factory. So at some point he was probably thinking of joining the resistance, but at that point that was probably a decisive moment. He said, I'd rather do that than going. So, and then after that he appeared sporadically, you know, when he could escape, like come back bringing some stuff at the house. Remember at that time there was no telephone or anything like this, so we had absolutely no idea where he was or us. And actually we were bombed 3 times, you know. Because we were close to the railroad station, so that was a target. The first time by the Italian, as Mussolini has joined Hitler. The second time by the American, and the third time by the German. When they left, they blow the bridge and everything behind us. And each time, the part of the house we lived in, it was a little apartment house, was destroyed. And each time we were at the garden with my grandmother. We had a garden, go to tend the garden, plant salad and so forth. So my 2 brothers and I were at the garden with my grandmother. My mother was working, my father was gone, but I can imagine him sneaking back into town, going to the house, and there is no one. So we find out that some cousin, and then eventually it was kind of fixed up, so then it happened again and so forth. So.
Wow. And now certain foods were rationed during the war years as well, right?
Yes, absolutely. You know, they were very, I mean, actually the food rationing went on in France until, I remember not that long before I went into apprenticeship. I went into apprenticeship in 1949. In 47, they were still rationing 2 years after the end of the war. It wasn't like everything was free all of a sudden. But during the war, I think I still had some ticket at home of certainly the butter and many other things. But my mother was a very miserly cook, as I am probably because of that, but very ingenious as well. So I remember the sugar we had at the time was she did with some type of beets that she cook and make some type of syrup, some type of you know, dark syrup that we use as sugar and stuff like that. You know.
What were some of the favorite foods that you had as a kid? Are there certain meals that you loved?
Well, certainly the chicken for us. It's not like the chicken was a common thing. You know, it was a special occasion because it was already pretty expensive. We ate a great deal of stew and stuff like that my mother did, but probably kind of just Chinese style with a very minimal amount of meat in it, like a pancetta we call lard in France, L-A-R-D, which is what Italian call pancetta, you know, which is cured bacon but not smoked. And she would put a little piece of that. I still do that stew, saute it and singe it with a little bit of flour, and then put thyme belly from the garden, and then potato in there. So it's kind of a potato stew, pretty filling, but then flavored with this. So it was often that type of thing. Then eggs, a fair amount of eggs, gratin of eggs, you know, hard-cooked egg slice too, with spinach underneath and a bechamel on top, or thing like that. Much more than meat. Meat was once, twice a week maybe. Fish not very often either, because we were not in an area by the sea. And when we had fish, it would be you know, from trout to tench or perch or any kind of sweetwater fish, you know, more than saltwater fish. Yes.
So were these the types of foods that your mother served in her restaurant as well?
It is, yes. And at that time, when I was going to the market with her, I remember that when I came to the U.S., our menu was 5 francs, so that was $1, 5 francs. At the time, the parity was $1 to 5 francs. And with that, she had hors d'oeuvres, so people would have like either a salad of tomato, let's say, or a slice of ham, or a green salad, or an artichoke. She had 4 or 5 hors d'oeuvres like this. Then a choice of probably a fish, and very often that would be at that point, I say mackerel or whiting or whatever, and or a piece of stew probably, or meat. Then vegetables were always separated. So the vegetable was separated, one vegetable, usually the same vegetable for the table. And then after that, either a piece of cheese or a crème caramel or an apple tart. She did the whole menu. She always had that on. And you had a carafe of wine, and tip and tax included, it was 5 francs, you know, $1. So she really had to, you know, do the market properly to be able to survive. That's the way it was at the time. You know.
So when did you decide that this is what you wanted to pursue for a living too? How did you become an apprentice?
Well, by the time I was probably 9, 10, 11, I was a bit more involved in the kitchen, doing, you know, helping my father in the cellar, drawing the wine from the cask, because he bought cask of wine, and we draw the wine, and if it was better wine, then we put wax on top, you know, dip it in the wax too. And so I thought that's what I wanted to do, and in addition to that, I had another aunt who had a restaurant in Nantua. Actually, I can count 12 restaurants in my family forever, owned by 12 women. So I'm the first male to go into that business. So yes, at that point, I think that I moved toward that direction. I was doing pretty well in school, and we had to go to school in France until the end of primary school, which is at 14 years old. And I was in that class, I think, when I was 12 and a half. So I was doing well in school. And in the French system, I could have continued, because if you pass your exam in France and want to higher education, you don't pay for it. So I could have, which is what my brother did to a certain extent, but for me, by the time I was 12, I wanted to go into the kitchen. So I left when I was 13, I finished my exam, whatever, and went into apprenticeship.
And who did you apprentice for? What were some of the things you learned at that time?
Well, I went back to the town. At that point, my mother was in Lyon, in a restaurant. I went back to Bourg-en-Bresse, where I was born, at the Hôtel de l'Europe, which was a very famous old hotel there. It was the first time I saw a kitchen in the hallway when people came, in the big hall, and you could see a big window open, and with glasses, and the kitchen, the people working behind the kitchen, a little bit like what's done now, but that was 70 years ago. So it was very exciting, and actually the chef there, I think my mother had been to school with him, knew that Paul Jauget, I mean, his name was, and the owner of the restaurant, Madame Denisot, was an old lady, the owner of the hotel, which she died not that long ago. I think she was 106 or something like that. Wow. Yes. And it was customary to do 2 or 3 years of apprenticeship, which is what I did, during which you were not paid. We live upstairs, the apprentice sleep upstairs, and no day off, so you work the whole month, 7 days a week, and at the end of the month you had 4 days, because there is 4 weeks in a month, well, more than 4 weeks, but we had 4 days at the end of the month, and then I took the bus to go back to Lyon. During those 4 days I brought my couple of hats that I had, my tuck, front, my jacket, pants, apron, towel, you know, the sheet of my bed, all of that brought back to my mother to wash and bring it back. That wasn't included in what we had. And I usually pay myself for that trip. So I made a little money by, we pick up wild mushroom, I pick up watercress in the river that we bunch. I remember first I've met a big thing in France, the lily of the valley. So we pick up lily of the valley to sell. I did little work here and there to get a little money on the side, at least for the first year and a half of apprenticeship. Then after I had a little bit of money, I think, that I got from the hotel.
So being a chef requires long hours standing, a lot of repetitive movements with a knife. Did you ever get any injuries in the kitchen?
Oh, I'm sure I cut myself, burned myself several times, you know. Never enough, I still have my 10th finger, but usually it happened in series, you know, like the same week you cut yourself 3 times or burn yourself 3 times. Yes, that does happen at the stove, is part. Especially that part of the arm is very tender, and at the stove or at the oven, you know, you grab things and you touch here. Yeah, that's part of the, yeah, your hands are pretty red and swollen after a couple of months.
It's just part of the trade?
Yes, part of the trade, yes.
So then, how did you come to work in Paris in the 1950s?
Well, I finished my apprenticeship, I think 1952, I think, and I went to Aix-les-Bains, which was a spa, not too far from Lyon, to do the summer. Those are hotels who only open during the summer, during the season, like 4 or 5 months, so you work straight through, there is no day off. The spa, and then I did the winter in Bellegarde, a small town on the way to Geneva, again, the winter, and then decided in the spring of, 52, I was 17 years old, I decided I want to go to Paris. So I told my mother I had a job there. I didn't have a job. Took the train, my thing, and went to Paris. And I had a friend, a guy who worked with me as an apprentice, Robert, I think his name was, and he was probably 4 or 5 years older than me. He had moved to Paris, and he sent me his address. So, of course, there was no telephone too, so I get out of the Gare du Nord in Paris with my suitcase, and by asking people, I walked probably several miles to get back to where he lived. He didn't know I was coming. I didn't even wrote him. I knocked at the door, and a pretty lady opened, and he was there with a girlfriend, I suppose, and then he came, I said, oh. So they put me on for the night, and the day after he took me to an organization called La Société des Cuisiniers de Paris, Society of the Chefs of Paris, which I don't even know why we don't have that in New York, but it's an organization. When you're a member of it, you go in the morning, you get a job for the day or 3 days or 5 days or whatever, as in quality of, depending what you are at the time, you have to register. That's why I probably work in close to 100 restaurants in Paris, because even though I work at the Plaza Athénée for 6 years or so, another place, often my day off, I go to La Société to do a job to get a little more money, or if I have a few days off, I did that. I remember 1 year for Easter, I had like 5 days off. I went to La Baule around that, the first time I saw the sea in Normandy there, to work at the casino for like 3 or 4 days. Yes, so that organization, I came there, I registered, I became a member, and so I got a job. La Grande Maxéville, it was a brasserie on the Grand Boulevard, on the boulevard in Paris, a big brasserie with a big orchestra, woman orchestra, you know, and the kitchen was like in 3 or 4 stories down along a former river where there was still, you could hear the sound of so those were a pretty dark area to work with in Paris, and so I started there, and after I stayed there a few weeks and then changed, get another job and so forth.
So you mentioned La Plaza Athénée.
yes.
What was that experience like? You were there for 6 years, you said.
Well, the Plaza Athénée was one of the grand palace of, but prior to that I worked at the Meurice Hotel, and the Meurice was even more famous, I mean, more fancy than the Plaza Athénée. It was really old classic French cooking. The chef ordered with a porte-voix, that is a kind of a cone like that. Well, he couldn't understand anything of what he was saying. But he ordered at that time, I think we were 15 or 18 in the kitchen there. But prior to the war, there were about 70 or so in that kitchen. So the kitchen was enormous for us. And we never served more than maybe 50 people, 60 people was going to be the panic in the kitchen. Everything was done on order, like we did a bouquetière of vegetable, you know, an area of different vegetables. So there was about 8 different types of vegetables, each cooked at the last moment. String beans, tomato, potato, cauliflower, this, that, to arrange in a tray. But everything on order too, so it was a very time-consuming way and very classic and old. So yeah, that was probably my first experience with really the old classic cuisine. The chef there had worked with Escoffier, you know, in the early part of the century. And then after that, I went to the Plaza Athénée, where we were about 50 in the kitchen. So I started, again, you know, when you go in those restaurants, depending where you go, you may be at the Plaza Athénée as a first commis, let's say, and you leave there to be the chef of a small restaurant. So, but you go back to one of those palaces, you're back to be second or third commis. So after your apprenticeship in a big place like the Plaza Athénée, you have a third commis, second commis, first commis. You work with the chef de partie, that is the head of the department there, whether it's the sauce department or fish or whatever, and eventually work your way up. So I remember when I left the Plaza Athénée, when I went into the army after, I was, my certificate of the Plaza Athénée stated that I was first commis. Then I had a letter from the chef, Monsieur Dier, who said that I was doing the job of the chef de partie, you know, so it was like a big deal to have that in addition. Of course, no one ever looked at those certificates when I came here, but...
So it sounds like this was a much different type of cooking than what your mother had done growing up.
Oh, certainly, yes. I mean, it was still the basic of fresh, good ingredient, you know. I mean, at that time, there was Les Halles in Paris, which was a big market, which covered probably 8 or 10 blocks, or maybe more than that, that we would think here, where at 2 o'clock in the morning, the chefs start coming, and you have, sometimes you can't even go through the street with enormous pallets of cauliflower or tomato or whatever it is. So all the chefs go there. At the same time, you see people coming out of nightclub in tuxedo and all that. All those guys with those white apron carrying, you know, a quarter of beef on their shoulders. So it was a very, Les Halles was a very exciting place, you know, which has been mentioned or in many books, certainly in Zola, The Ballet of Paris, and other famous writer of the 19th century and 20th century. So yeah, there was the quality, probably that the same, in fact, that my mother had, but done in a very classic Escoffier way. And the idea at that time, certainly in the kitchen, was to conform, to do the way. At the Plaza Athénée, we cut a tomato this way. I would never have thought of putting it on the side, cutting it the other way. First time I saw that, I said, well, what would you do that for? So that was the way it was, to conform. And we do a famous, many famous dish. One of them was the lobster souffle at the Plaza Athénée. I'm sure that probably 40 or 50 out of the 50 chefs could have done it, and you would not have known which one had done it. That was the idea, to conform, which is quite different than now. You know, where now the chefs say, make sure they know I'm signing that dish, I'm the one who did it. You know, so it's quite different, certainly. And at that time, this is how you remember dishes, through your palate, because I don't think I ever had a cookbook in France. The first time I put a cookbook when I was here. And so, but if you would put something on my eyes and give me the lobster souffle, I would say that the lobster souffle of the Plaza Athénée. This is the striped bass of the Pavilion in New York. This is poulet à la crème of my mother. You know, I would recognize those dishes by taste. That's the way it was, to conform, you know.
Did you like cooking that way, or did you have a desire to kind of try to put your stamp on things?
Well, I never really thought of whether I liked it or not. I mean, there was no, at that time, it's not like you had to express yourself or do, that didn't exist. As I say, you conform and you learn, and you learn, and you learn, and you're able to run it by yourself, so it's always an accomplishment, you know, to move forward, and the speed at which you work. You know, certainly I am dean at what used to be called the French Culinary Institute here, which is ICC now, but when people graduate after 6 months, I would never have been able, after 3 years of apprenticeship, to do what they are doing in 6 months. However, my hand was much faster because there is a great deal of, at the stove when I was an apprentice, for a year, I cleaned up the floor, and then I start scaling the fish and plucking the chicken, eviscerating the chicken. So a lot of plucking, cleaning, doing vegetable and all that too, without anyone telling you how to do it. They just tell you to do it. And then one day the chef, at that time I think he called me Petit, you know, which is little guy. And then one day he called me Jacques. My name, I said, wow. He said, you start at the stove tomorrow. Well, you know, I was 14 years old. I was pretty, and I said, well, I don't know how to do it, but I went to the stove and I knew how to do it. So you learn through a type of osmosis, you know, by repeating, and the chef tell you do that. And you would never even have said why. But if you had said why, you would have said, because I just told you. So that was about the end of the explanation. So it was another way of learning that we have now. I still remember I was about 14, maybe 15 at the time, and I was pretty small for my, and one day, Angèle, I think it was Angèle, the waitress, it was an old waitress, they came knock at my door at 10:30 at night. I was in bed already, and then 4 people just arrived, and they wanted to have dinner, and everyone was gone. I was the oldest apprentice. I mean, not the oldest, but maybe the more ancient apprentice. So they took me down, and okay, they ordered poulet à la crème, chicken cream sauce, and all that. And apparently they like it, so they wanted to see the chef. So here I came in the dining room, like 14, I said, this is the chef, 15 years old. So that was the way. So in Paris, you know, there was a great deal to learn in the classic repertory of cooking, hundreds of different types of dish that you go through, whether it was at the Meurice or the Plaza Athénée. So I never thought of questioning that. It didn't exist. That would not exist before Nouvelle Cuisine, and that would be, you know, in the 70s or the end of the 60s or whatever.
And that was more of a, you got to put your stamp on the dishes?
Well, yes, at the time of Nouvelle Cuisine, you know, it was a cuisine worked out by some of the great chefs in France, like Bocuse and so forth, where they said we have to reduce the amount of what we do in the menu, we have to shorten the sauce, we have to do it only with fresh ingredients, we have to go to the market every day, we have to be mindful of the health of our customer, we can use new equipment like the food processor. So it was all kind of a revolution. And for many chefs who spoke about Nouvelle Cuisine at the time, I mean, even young chefs now, it wasn't nouvelle for them because that's when they started. But it certainly was nouvelle for me, or André Saltner, or Alain Seillac, all my peers, because we knew what it was before, so all of a sudden you could. And it was good for us at the time because we had enough knowledge in our hand so that we could start experimenting with our own idea and so forth, which is what young chefs don't understand very much now, because creativity is good, but by itself it's not enough. It has to be based, for me, on with thorough knowledge of the classic with some type of base, you know.
So it sounds like maybe that's the period when chefs began to be highly regarded in their own right and more individualistic?
Oh, yes, certainly, yes.
How were chefs regarded in Paris, like in the 1950s?
Well, the chef was behind the stove in this, and no one ever went to the dining room or whatever. It did not exist at the time. At the time, the maître d' was more famous, and when people wanted to invest, open a new restaurant, then they would find a famous maître d' too, and he would turn around and just get some chef, and that was it. There was a place in Paris, Rue Saint-Honoré, it's called, it's a small street, Rue de la Sourdière, close to the Society of the Chef that I was mentioning before. And then there is a whole block here, we call it La Grille. A grille is a wire wall that you have in restaurant, like, you know, and because there was a bistro there called La Grille, but that whole block in the afternoon, I think it was on Wednesday, because we work from usually around 8 o'clock in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. Then there is a coupure, you know, you cut at 2 until 6, start at 6 until 10 at night. So we have that block in the afternoon that we went to the garden or went to a bistro or went somewhere else. Usually you couldn't even go home, it was too far. But on that Wednesday, then the chef meet here. So it was an open market for chefs. So you had maybe, I don't know, 1,000 people there in the street talking, and or I need someone, or you need a chef, or you this, that too. So it was that type of thing where people went on Wednesday to meet old friends and all that, and that's often the way I got a job here and there for a few days. So it was that type of thing, but the chef was not recognized otherwise. As I said, Maitre D would come here and say, I need 5 chefs, I need those guys, and that was the way it was. None of the recognition that we have now.
Mm-hmm. Now you mentioned you served in the military. Where did you serve?
Well, in the military, I was called there in 1956, and so I was called in the Navy. And actually, the Navy usually were enlisted men, and I was drafted. It was, you know, it was a mandatory service in France to be drafted, and it was during the war in Algeria, so most people were sent to Algeria. Of course, and as I said, in the Navy, usually it was enlisted people, except for the chef, who had some type of arrangement with the Société des Cuisiniers de Paris. So they would send those chefs to different you know, boat and ship and all that, where they work on top, because contrary to here, the chef in France, in those organizations, is going to go to the market, he's got a certain budget, he's got to work out, and for a big holiday like Christmas too, those guys expect to have not only turkey or lobster or whatever, so you have to work out your budget normally. So professionals are used in this way, certainly in the Navy. So I was sent in the Navy, and I went to do boot camp near Bordeaux there for about 8 weeks, and well, it was pretty grueling, you know, and that's some type of commando thing that I did there. I was in really good physical shape, and then I was marked to go to Algeria, again another commando type of marine, and I was very excited for that, of course, as a young idiot, you know. So you think war is great, but my mother was crazy because my brother was there. My brother was 16 months older than me, and as I say, he was an engineer. So he was in the Air Force. He was a sergeant, actually, in the Air Force, because he was. And he was in in combat zone near Sidi Bel Abbès, next to Algiers. And theoretically, at that time, they did not send 2 brothers of the same family at the same time for the drafted. Not the enlisted, but for the drafted, because they had a whole family being killed of brothers. So one of them has to come back before the other one going. So things changed, and I was sent back to Paris with to work at the Admiralty, you know, serving the big brass there, and work in the kitchen there. And at some point, I had a friend of mine that I met there who was from Lyon, and he was a chef as well, and he was working for the minister of again of treasury, the treasury minister, whatever, and which was an extraordinary place because it's on the side where you have the Louvre Museum on one side, and on the other side the Minister of Finance, you know, the treasury minister. So those apartments were during the time of Napoleon too. I mean, the old type of thing, and but he never worked in Paris, that young man. So he told me, you know, I have banquets which are scheduled, and I really don't know much about classical. Can you give me a hand? I said, I'd love to. I mean, so he asked Weber, big brass there, which called Weber, they call and so I was sent there to give him a hand and start doing special dinner with him and so forth. And I continued doing this. And eventually he was released, you know, and so they asked me to come there for the Minister of Finance in the Treasury, which I stayed a couple of months. And at that point, during the Fourth Republic in France, the government were changing at a fairly rapid pace, and that that Minister of Finance, name was Gaillard, became the president in France. That is the president of the Council of Ministers, which is the prime minister. At that time in France, under the Fourth Republic, the president didn't have much power, like the Queen of England. It was the prime minister who had the power. At Matignon, Hotel Matignon, which is a private residence on the Rue de Varenne, which had the largest private garden in Paris. It's an old hotel of the 18th century. So he became the prime minister there. So I was sent there the first day that he became to cook a dinner for 8, I remember. I had to be rushed there. And then I stayed there, of course, and I ended up going under 3 ministers. His government lasted 6 months and whatever. And then the one after lasted like a month, and then it blew again. On the 18th of May, I think, de Gaulle came to power, and I stayed with de Gaulle until I was released close to 1959. You know, so I was there. But at that time, you know, again, there was no recognition in the kitchen. I worked with Madame de Gaulle during the de Gaulle things. She called me Petit Jacques. You know, I mean. I saw the president, of course, for like Christmas, for a different occasion where he would come and toast with us. And before I left, they invited me in their room. He wished me good luck and gave me a cigar, I remember. So anyway, I did the menu on Monday with Madame de Gaulle for the week. And there was the Secretary of Treasurer, different dinner, 8, 6, 8. Usually small dinner like this. When we had large dinner, about 40 or 50, it was a kind of catering business who came and did it. But I served like Eisenhower, Nehru, Tito, Macmillan. Those were the head of state at the time. Dinner of 10, 12, 8. And certainly when it came to those type of dinner, then you deal with the protocol. Like, for example, if I have the Prime Minister of India, we're not going to serve beef, you know, and if I have the President of Israel, I'm not going to serve a piece of pork or whatever like this. So there is certain protocol that the protocol will tell you. In addition, will tell you the menu has to be long or very complicated or more fancy or shorter. So all of that is worked out by the protocol. Or they'll tell you, like when Eisenhower came, he already had dinner with the president or a meal at maybe at the American embassy or somewhere, and they said they served that type of fish too, so I wasn't going to serve the same type of fish. So, which is different when I did the menu on Sunday. On Sunday after church, the whole family ate there, and it was, they were very devout Catholics, so. But there was a Dominical, the Sunday meal, you know, with the president, his wife, children, grandchildren did. So at that point, they ate exactly what they wanted to eat. Madame de Gaulle said, I want a leg of lamb, not too rare, so good, this, that, too. So that was a different type of thing that when we serve head of state. I have to say also that on that Sunday meal, I had to do a special ledger and accounting that they pay from their own pocket. So that was pretty remarkable in the sense that it was a drop of water in what we spent, but de Gaulle was very ethical this way. That was the way it was, even though he wasn't a wealthy man at all. They weren't. So, but during those dinners that I did, we tried to take a peek outside to see, you know, whatever celebrity it was, but never, you would never be called to the dining room and get kudo like now too. That did not exist, period. No one ever came to the kitchen. If anyone came to the kitchen because something was wrong, you were going to be yelled at. That's what about the end of it. Maybe the day after, when I see Madame de Gaulle, but say, it was good last night, thank you, or something like that. But that would go maybe as far as this. So it was totally different way than it is now. Yeah.
How big was your cooking staff at that time? How many people were in the kitchen?
Me and my friend Jean-Claude, who I call someone with a very dear friend of me who lives upstate New York now. After we worked there, when I came to America, so of course he followed me. Eventually he got married, he's got kids too. So at some point, yes, I say I need a pastry chef there. You know, I cannot do the pastry at the end too. So he was in the regular army, in the army, and so they sent him to me, and so we became friends there at that point, and he stayed with me. So it was just the two of us and the dishwasher and the maitre d', which was very fancy dress with, and his wife. But I've been there for years, so his wife helped also in the kitchen and so forth. But that was a very small staff. That's why we did not do large. I think the biggest thing that I did, 30 people, I think, or so, which was already a big deal for us to do it. But we had some fancy stuff. I mean, when the foreign minister, for example, went to Russia, he brought back like those cans of beluga caviar, like 5 pounds, those 2-kilo cans that we had in the kitchen. So we really trained our palate there. We had the cheese, for example, fromage Androuet cheese, a very famous fromager in Paris, So they would bring a tray of cheese every day, and we give the other one to the employee. Superb quality. When we had oyster, it was Prunier, which is a famous, place where you get oyster, crustacean, and all that in Paris, who would come to open them just when they sit down. So it was very simple, if you want, but extremely perfect. I mean, elegant. So, but no big dinner, so very rarely,
So why did you decide to come to the United States?
Well, it was Visi, Vini, Vici. So I came. I was unattached, and I had a good job in Paris. And I suppose that most people who come to America come because of usually economic reason, to have a better life, or racial reason, or political reason, or religious reason. I didn't have any of those reasons, but America was, and still is, to a certain extent, the golden fleece, I mean, the El Dorado. So I say, I want to go there and spend a year. I didn't intend to stay there. I spent a year on the language and was excited to come. And from the first day I came to New York, I loved it and never went back. But I didn't really intend it to stay when I first came.
So how did you start to learn the language?
I'm sorry?
How did you learn English?
Well, I learned English, but I knew that I was coming to America. Then I took some classes in Paris, but I mean, very rudimentary. I mean, my English was practically nihil, So, but I came on a student boat, and there were about 1,200 American students coming back from Russia, Italy, to the whole summer group, and I don't even know how I got to go on that boat called the Ascania. It was very inexpensive. It took about 8 days. We saw 2 aurora borealis going through Canada, and we ended up in Montreal. No, we ended up in Quebec. So my first word on the American continent was in an old French expression that I won't even tell you of those guys in Quebec. So from Quebec, I took the train to Montreal, and Montreal to Grand Central. I arrived in Grand Central with my suitcase here. So on board that thing, I spoke, I tried speaking a little bit of my English, did a lot of mistaking, and I met a man here who spoke French. He was a teacher, and I said, he told me, how long are you going to be in America? I said, I don't know, maybe a year or two, but I would like to go to school and learn the language better. So he told me the best school in New York is Columbia University. Never heard of it, of course. So I said, okay. So I came the day after I started working at the Pavilion, and someone explained me the subway system. I took the subway to go to Columbia, maybe a week, 2 weeks after, and 3 weeks later, because it was the beginning of September when I come, and at the end of September I was registered in a class. I took an entrance examination, English for foreign students. Those were not credited classes at the time. But I had done enough, maybe reading or writing, that I was in intermediate English, which when I came into the class, I couldn't understand one word. In terms of speaking language, I couldn't understand one word. And it was usually big class of like 40, 50 people. And I would say probably 80% Asian, Chinese did that too, but usually not many French, maybe 1, 2. So it was quite different, but eventually I passed at the end of the term, took the exam. I passed. I went to what we called EV5. So I went to EV6, and eventually the next one. I did that for 2 years. At that point, to be at English for freshmen. So it was the end of the program there, which was not credited. So I said, well, I want to go on. So I went to see an advisor. At that time, I spoke English enough to be able to have a conversation, of course. And I said, I want to continue in school, but I've never been to high school. So what do? He said, well, twice a year we give a large exam here. There is about 300 people on tape. And at that time, it was the beginning on tape, where you will, they will evaluate you in some way. So, it would start with mathematics, with an addition, and then with a subtraction, and with a multiplication, with a division, with a fraction, with an equation, first degree. So, I mean, wherever you could go, you go and you stop. And the same thing in asking you a question about from geography to literature to whatever it was. And somehow I had read a great deal when I was in Paris at the Plaza Ascendee. By the way, there was a library for the employee. And so I did a lot of reading there and went back to the theater a great deal in Paris, to the classic theater of Paris, La Comédie Française, as well as the opera. At that time, to go there, it would cost me the same amount of money that it would to put in a jukebox to play for song. It was the same price to go to the Comédie Française and all that. Very, very, because it's subventioned by the government. So, we went that. It was less expensive than going to the movie, So I guess I did well enough that in that exam, I was accepted in that validation program, where within 2 years, I had to do that class, and keep a B average. And if I was accepted, then those would be credited already, and I would accept it in the regular college. So that's what I did. And probably I still remember the harder class I ever did in my life was a review of 3 years or 4 years of high school algebra, geometry, plane geometry, maybe even a bit of solid geometry or whatever, the review. First, I never had it. Secondly, it was a review. And thirdly, it was in English, of course. They were teaching, so each time I had a new subject, the guy said, this is a square. I said, a square, what is a square? Oh, it's a carré. Yeah, right. So, a new language of each of those new subjects, So, in addition to that, the teacher to bring an idea to you would do an analogy with, I don't know, baseball or something like that, which I have absolutely no idea what he would be talking about. So anyway, I remember I took that class, and after a week, 2 weeks, I said, there's no way that I can't do that. At that time, I was director of research for Howard Johnson in Queens Village. And then the director of the office there, still remember, Jacques Pepin. He used to be a former math teacher in high school. And I told him my problem. He loves cooking too. I said, okay, you come, I'll teach you cooking at night. So he sponsored me. I mean, he helped me for time of the course, and somehow I passed that class. And then I did a class in the calculus after or whatever, but it was a continuation of it. So I finished it, and I was accepted in the program in general study at Columbia, and I went on to do a BA, I was even on the dean list, and then I went into the graduate school, and I still remember at the time I was offered even a Woodrow Wilson scholarship, which I didn't have to pay, but I had to fill up the paper, and the paper said that I cannot work more than 25 hours a week, but I was working at Howard Johnson. So I said, well, I can't do it. They will know it, and I'll go to jail or whatever, so I have to read. I was kind of naive at the time. So, and I went to the graduate school, and eventually I did a master on Voltaire, 18th century, my paper. I was doing literature and philosophy. And then I wanted to continue, and I passed most of the requirement, 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th century to do a PhD. And when the time came for my dissertation, I was talking about food and culture, during the year. So I wanted to start at the Pléiade poet in the 16th century in France up to the little Madeleine of Proust, the early 20th century, through the encyclopedies, 18th century and other, from Voltaire, Diderot. And at that time, they told me, are you crazy? Food? No, no, you cannot do that. I said, but, you know, I want to do it within the context of literature and culture. No, no, you cannot do that. I said, I'm not spending 3 years of my life on a demonstrative pronoun or one of those things. So I quit. I didn't do it. And then it's a program that we established at BU. I've been teaching at BU 35 years now, and we, in the 90s, with Julia, we wrote to Silbert, the president, to do a program in gastronomy, and we wanted to do undergraduate. We ended up doing a Master of Liberal Art with a concentration in gastronomy. So I've been teaching in that program a number of years. But so I never got my PhD at Columbia, except last June, Columbia gave me a PhD. So, and the president announced that they refused me 40 years ago, whatever. Now it would be quite all right to do that type of subject, which at the time was not. So it has changed a great deal, as you can see, not only the profile of the chef, but study. And it was the idea at BU to do that. I wanted to get the resource of a university to filter their knowledge through food. And, you know, even in the theology department, you know, food in the Bible, someone could teach through that. Of course, the medical department, I mean, just the physiology of the body, the food, and then, of course, theology, anthropology, history, sociology, even politics, you know, decision of food in politics, who decide who died or live in the world, basically. So even in art, I did a thing at the museum of, in the Modern Museum in Boston once, the Impressionist painting, and I follow, as people do, a tape on that, explaining when it was done. I do the tape because it was a thing on food, talking about Manet and the white asparagus, which are asperges d'Argenteuil, you know, or things like this. So again, through art or whatever, food can be filtered through. So that was the idea of doing that program at BU, just to get the resources of the university to do, and they've done that to a certain extent, you know, that too.
It's fantastic. So I want to back up for a minute. You mentioned two positions that you held, Le Pavillon and at Howard Johnson's.
Right.
So how did you move through those positions?
Well, when I first came, then I worked at the Pavillon, and as I said, the day after, the chef was Pierre Frenet. It was the most, you know, the greatest French restaurant in America at the time, and it would continue to be for a number of years. And but for me, it was really nothing that new. I didn't learn much at the Pavillon from what I've done in Paris. But I thought it was working halfway, because I worked from 2 o'clock in the afternoon till 11 o'clock at night. One shot instead of two. It was in Paris, 9 o'clock in the morning. You stop at 2, start at 6 till 10. There it was only one shift either in the morning or at night. So it was much easier for me to do many other things that I have never done before, you know. So the Pavillon was great, and in the spring of 1960, however, we had problem with the owner Soulet, and Pierre Frenet was there for many years, was fighting for us to. It was a big thing. It was in the New York Times too, and Pierre decided to leave. So for me, I was fomenting a rebellion in the kitchen. When the chef leave, everyone followed the chef to support the chef like it did in Paris. So I started opening my mouth a bit too much, and I had two guys who came one night with hat too. They grabbed me, they put me onto the wall. That was a few months after I was here. I didn't speak English, but it was Local 89, like the mafia guy. They grabbed me, and I understand they told me to just shut up. But anyway, we continue. So two guys left, and we eventually all left. They had to close the Pavillon and all that. So at that time, I was working another restaurant there. And in the spring of 1960, then when Kennedy was running for president, you know, I was offered the job at the White House and it happened because the Kennedy group ate at the Pavillon in what they call La Royale, which was the center, the most important, you know, table in the restaurant, and they had done Duchess of Windsor and all the very famous people. usually with Joseph Kennedy, the father, which was running. And in the spring, during the campaign, they were eating there, and there is a photographer who came in to shoot picture of them. And Joseph Kennedy promptly asked the maitre d', Denis, he said, get that photograph out of here. So, and then Soule was the owner of the pavilion, was probably a Republican. In addition, he goes there, he said, at the pavilion, it's Soule who decide who come and go there. I mean, some type of stupid thing this way. And, well, the Kennedy paid the bill, left, and never came back. And they moved to La Caravelle, and that was one of the problems probably for Soule, because we had all left already, and we opened La Caravelle. Roger Fessaguet was the sous-chef at the pavilion. He opened La Caravelle as one partner. I worked there as sous-chef. So they moved to La Caravelle, and that's what happened. A few weeks later on, again, he came back and asked Robert Mézin was the owner, and Roger Fessaguet, the chef. We did a chef at the White House, and that's when Roger called me and asked me if I wanted to come. It was not a... And I was tempted to go, and at that time, Pierre Frenet, who had left the pavilion, was hired at Howard Johnson, because Mr. Johnson, Howard D. Johnson, the father, was a regular at the pavilion as well, and he knew Pierre, and he said, one day you're going to work for me. So he hired Pierre as the vice president, director of operation, and Pierre wanted me to go with him. And so I was kind of a bit torn between those two things, and to tell you the truth, I did not realize at all the potential of working at the White House, and the importance, because, as I said before, I had been the chef to the president in France. I'd never been once where television barely existed, but or in a newspaper or magazine or an interview or that did not exist. The cook was in the kitchen, period. So I had no idea of the potential of publicity for that. So the man who went there was a friend of mine. He was the sous-chef at the White House, at the Essex House, René Verdon, and I called Roger. I said, call René. So he called, and eventually got the job there for, and it was probably in 64 or 3, whatever, that first time, Madame Kennedy, Jacques Kennedy took a picture of her chef with her in the kitchen, and it was early 60s, women liberation, organic gardening, health food store, a lot of social changes, and the role of the chef started changing to a certain extent at that point. But if you ask anyone who was the chef at the White House before René Verdon, I happen to know it was a black woman, a black lady from the South, but no one would have known her, no more than they knew me, or that's the way it was. So when I was asked to do that job, I had no idea of the potential. And Howard Johnson, on the other hand, I would learn about mass production, marketing, American eating habit, and mass production, certainly, chemistry of food. And all of a sudden I knew what bacteria, coliform, specific gravity was. I was chemist. So I went to Howard Johnson with Pierre, and then I stayed there 10 years, from 1960 to 1970.
So coming from France, you used the metric system, right?
Yes.
So talk about converting things for the U.S. system. Was that
well,
a challenge?
actually, very often in large production, you look in metric, but it wasn't the case there. It was gallon. So, we got 500-gallon kettle. We stay on the side to go on top to look, but we were free to do whatever we wanted. Mr. Johnson was great this way. Howard D., the father, he said, you do whatever you want. So we start doing dishes, 10 pound, 20 pound, 30 pound. I go to small kettle, do 50 pound of this, change the idea, change the way of doing it, work with chemists, whether it could be frozen or preserved. I remember at that time boning out turkey and taking the breast, putting it into what was called cryovacs for the package too, and pushing it at low temperature. This is what the new chef calls sous vide now. That was early 1960. So yes, we did a lot of things, and I learned a great deal. Because then I opened a restaurant on Fifth Avenue called La Potagerie in 1917, production. And it was large production of soup. I did 150 gallons of soup a day, 3 soup. Then I opened the World Trade Center with Joe Baum. That is, I set up the commissary. We could fit 20,000 people a day there. So I set up the commissary. Then I work at the Russian tea room in the 80s as a consultant. I'm saying that because all of those jobs, I would not have been able to do those jobs without the training of Howard Johnson. You know, it was another world.
So what were you learning about American eating habits and foods at that time? What were the
Well,
tastes?
you know, from southern fried chicken to a lobster roll to a fried clam at Howard Johnson to, you know, triple decker tank. I mean, all kind of the 28 flavor of ice cream we had at Howard Johnson, which was higher in butterfat than anything we had in France in a different way. So yes, it was kind of another world too.
So we can take a short break now if you like, or we can keep going.
Okay.
Wanna take a short break?
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a short break.